Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the shocking story of David Bowie entered a meeting full of Wall Street executives in 1997, something no rock star had ever done before, and left with $55 million without creating a new song, going on a tour, releasing a box set, or compiling his best hits. The money he would make from his music over the following 10 years was instead packaged, securitized, and offered as an asset-backed security in the form of bonds backed by the future royalties of his current music repertoire. This is the story of how David Bowie, a master of reinvention, changed himself one last time from an artist stuck in his past to a financial revolutionary who outperformed the system. The move rocked the music industry, saved him from financial ruin, and permanently altered how artists value their work. A terrible reality was concealed by David Bowie's stage personas Glitz and Glamour. Ziggy Stardust's creator was quietly going bankrupt. Bowie's problems stemmed from a catastrophic contract with Tony Dries, his previous manager. Bowie signed away around half of the income from his most famous works in the early 1970s when his fame was growing. Half of the money went directly into DeFree's pockets each time Ziggy Stardust was purchased or Space Oddity was broadcast on the radio. Bowie never publicly acknowledged the depth of his anguish, but reports indicate he was extremely upset when he understood what he had signed away. His peak cocaine use in the middle of the 1970s occurred at the same time as this catastrophe. He was almost destroyed by the combo. By 1975, following the release of the Young Americans album with soul influences, his connection with DeFreeze was no longer viable. Despite their contentious and painful breakup, the harm had already been done. During this turbulence, one individual became Bowie's anchor because the music that had made him famous wasn't entirely his own. His personal assistant and confidant, Karen Coco Schwab, was hired in 1973. Coco did much more than just oversee his schedule. She became one of his most trusted confidants after assisting him in overcoming addiction and navigating financial difficulties, although Bowie's financial condition remained dire despite her assistance. From his groundbreaking Berlin trilogy to his box office success Let's Dance, his creative productivity never stopped. Yet the financial limitations from those early contracts haunted him for decades. The sour irony: Bowie was determined to change the fact that his most revolutionary music was making someone else wealthy at the start of the 1990s. When 1997 rolled along, CD sales were soaring. The digital revolution was only a potential danger. With his marriage to supermodel Iman, Bowie, at 50, had achieved personal stability. However, he was still plagued by those early contracts, and Bowie, who was always ahead of his time, felt that the music business was going to undergo a permanent transformation. At that point, David Pullman, an investment banker, came to him with a completely novel notion that had never been tried in the history of music. What if Bowie could issue bonds to turn the future earnings from his catalog into instant cash? The idea was groundbreaking. Investors would purchase bonds backed by the anticipated future earnings of songs like Heroes, Changes, and Life on Mars rather than real estate or government guarantees. Later, Pullman recalled Bowie's immediate comprehension. "Why haven't we started yet?" David said after I gave him the rundown. He never gave it a second thought. David grasped the idea right away, as Pullman recounted. Bowie's extraordinary foresight, which he had negotiated to own or reclaim custody of his master recordings for the pertinent catalog years prior, made this possible. This essential ownership provided him with the funds required for Pullman's creative scheme. The music industry was taken aback by the statement on February 12, 1997. $55 million in bonds secured by revenues from 25 pre-1990 albums were issued by David Bowie. Bowie received instant cash when Credential Financial bought the full offering, in return for a 10-year, 7.9% annual interest rate. The media quickly called them in the first instance of an artist ever securitizing their intellectual property. Bowie binds. Why would Bowie basically wager against his own profits in the future when he had a plan for that money that would completely alter the situation? The $55 million wasn't used on private aircraft or houses. Bowie had a single main objective: recover his initial catalog from Tony DeFries. Bowie at last had clout with this new war chest. Although the precise sum is unknown, estimations indicate that Bowie paid about $27 million to DeFries to restore control. The talks weren't simple, but as Pullman pointed out, Tony is quite astute. "I didn't know he was an attorney as well as a manager, but money talks." Bowie was taking back control of the music that shaped his career for the first time since the early 1970s. He was able to invest in his future with the leftover monies. In 1998, he established Bowie, his own internet service provider with unique content and pioneering social networking capabilities. Bowie operated from 1998 and 2006. Despite their limited popularity, pioneering artist-driven web platforms showed his innovative approach to technology at a time when other musicians hadn't even thought about how the internet would affect music. More significantly, the connection strengthened his financial stability, allowing him more creative freedom. He could now make artistic decisions based on his own desires rather than his need for money because he had financial stability and a substantial portion of his catalog under control. A musician continuously pushing limits after being released from the need to produce commercial hits in order to survive was demonstrated by albums like Heathen, 2002, and Reality, 2003. What appeared impossible had been accomplished with the $55 million. In one audacious move, David Bowie, who had previously been on the verge of bankruptcy and had to watch half of his earnings go to a former manager, reversed his financial circumstances and solidified control over his creative legacy. Bowie's actions in that boardroom sparked a gold rush in addition to saving his personal money. Suddenly, all of the music industry's managers were hurriedly phoning their financial advisors with a single query: "Is it possible for my customer to do what Bowie just did overnight?" Bowie altered the way Wall Street suits perceived rock and roll. Songs were assets that could be divided up, packaged, and traded like financial items. They were no longer just something you heard on the radio. Wall Street formally welcomed rock and roll to the trading floor when Moody's assigned the bonds an A3 investment-grade rating, which is equivalent to that of many Fortune 500 corporations. Record executives who had previously dismissed musicians abruptly had to rethink their strategy. What were the true values of the Beatles or Elvis catalogs if Bowie's songs were worth $55 million? Other musicians swiftly followed. James Brown, the lead for Bowie. Similar agreements were sought by Iron Maiden, Motown's renowned songwriting duo, and Holland Dozier Holland. The Pullman Ensemble was at the forefront of a brand new musical industry financial frontier. Bowie's friendship was unique in one important way. In addition to the publishing rights, they also included the master recordings. The majority of later celebrity bonds primarily addressed publishing. Therefore, Bowie's agreement was more extensive and worthwhile than the imitations that came after. Despite how inventive Bowie bonds were, their time would only last a little while. The music industry was experiencing unheard-of change by the early 2000s. The revenue mechanism that had made the bonds appealing was seriously undermined by file-sharing sites like Napster. Bowie had foreseen this change. He said in a 2002 interview with the New York Times that music would eventually become like electricity or running water. Within 10 years, everything we have ever considered about music will completely change, and nothing will be able to stop it. This prediction turned out to be remarkably true. The royalties supporting the Bowie bonds dwindled as CD sales fell and digital piracy rose. Despite these difficulties, the bonds met their commitments even after Moody's downgraded them to Ba3 in 2004, almost junk status. All of Credential's payments were made on schedule, and by 2007, precisely 10 years after they were issued, the bonds had been entirely repaid. Bowie had strategically timed his innovation to maximize the value of his repertoire right before the conventional music industry started to collapse. Bowie came into the 2000s stronger than he had been in decades thanks to his financial stability and the restoration of his rights. Because of this security, he was able to broaden his work and pursue artistic endeavors. He landed iconic acting parts in movies including The Prestige, 2006, directed by Christopher Nolan. He worked with younger artists who had been impacted by his work from TV on the radio to Arcade Fire as children. Bowie mostly stopped performing in public after having a heart attack in 2004 in order to concentrate on his family life with Iman and their daughter Alexandria. After 10 years of seclusion, his intermittent creative production culminated the next day in 2013, demonstrating his ability to continue to garner both critical and commercial acclaim. Blackstar, his final masterpiece, was released 2 days prior to his death on January 10, 2016, from liver cancer. Bowie accomplished the unthinkable by transforming even his own death into art, gifting the world with a parting gift just days before he passed away. He continued to surprise us by calling the shots in his last bow. Bowie's music collection is estimated to be worth $100 million, while his estate is said to be worth around $200 million. An incredible recovery from his early career's financial instability 6 years after his passing, the last mic drop occurred. For $250 million, his estate sold his publishing rights, which is almost 5 times the amount that Wall Street investors paid in 1997. In the end, the guy who sold the Globe had sold his catalog for the ransom of a king. Bowie's methodology has impacted a generation of artists. Taylor Swift followed Bowie's example of claiming ownership of one's creative output as a necessity for both artistic and economical reasons when she decided to re-record her early albums in order to regain possession of her master recordings. David Pullman, who oversaw the initial Bond agreement, recognized Bowie's crucial contribution. Bowie made me well known. David Bowie is the one whose shoulders I am standing on. As the years went by, Bowie bonds, in spite of their success, came to be criticized and mythologized. The digital change of the music industry presented the biggest obstacle right away. As ownership eventually gave way to streaming, the value proposition of bonds backed by royalties became hazy. These worries were reflected in Moody's 2004 downgrading of Bowie bonds to almost junk status. This downgrading was used by some detractors as proof that the bonds had failed, although they overlooked this. Every payment was sent on time, even with Napster iTunes and the total collapse of CD sales. Bowie delivered as usual, and Credential received all of the money they were due plus interest. Years later, the most bizarre dispute may have arisen when financial analysts attempted to connect Bowie bonds to the 2008 financial crisis. It was argued that Bowie had somehow contributed to the hazardous securitization methods that caused the mortgage catastrophe by being a pioneer in the use of asset-backed securities in entertainment. That would be like to attributing a stabbing spree to the creator of the butter knife. Mortgage-backed securities have existed since the 1970s, as The Guardian noted. It would be like comparing a campfire to a forest inferno to compare Bowie's $55 million deal to the $1 trillion subprime mortgage catastrophe. The reason Bowie pursued the bond agreement at the time is especially telling, as his subsequent remarks imply that he was concerned about the impact of piracy by the late 1990s and that royalty streams may decline as music consumption evolved. His business savvy aligns with his artistic vision, as evidenced by his insight in selling high before the market turned. In hindsight, Bowie Bonds is a victory of time rather than a controversy. An ideal instance in which an artist was able to use his heritage to save his future, since he recognized both his cultural significance and the imminent technology disruption. David Bowie's transition from David Jones to Ziggy Stardust shaped his career. His most significant change occurred away from the spotlight, though, when he went from being a struggling rock star who watched others become wealthy off of his music to a financial innovator who taught the entire industry that artists could compete and succeed at Wall Street's own game. The Bowie links were authentically Bowie, not merely smart. The same individual who exterminated Ziggy Stardust at the height of his fame realized that the CD boom would end before anybody else did. As usual, Bowie was always 3 steps ahead of the competition when other rock stars continued to pocket their royalties mindlessly. This financial innovation perfectly captures what made Bowie unique. The capacity to see around corners, foresee developments before they occur, and turn obstacles into possibilities, from the 1970s dire financial situation to the historic 1997 bond agreement to the $250 million catalog sale. Bowie's financial journey after death is similar to his artistic one. A tale of triumph, resiliency, and reinvention. Eventually, the guy who descended to earth reached untouchable heights. As a trailblazer who recognized that genuine artistic freedom frequently necessitates financial independence, in addition to being an artist, Bowie's example is just as brilliant as his music in a world where musicians still fight for credit. A guide for artists who want to take charge of their financial and artistic futures. Did Bowie have exceptional timing that allowed other artists to regain ownership of their catalogs? Or was he a financial genius ahead of his time?